My name is Alicia Plerhoples. I am a Fleming Professor of Law here at Georgetown Law School. I'm also an Associate Dean for our clinics and experiential learning programs. This morning, we are going to be talking about guaranteed income, and our experts on this panel will provide an overview covering what is guaranteed income, how the programs are implemented, and whether guaranteed income programs are reducing the racial wealth gap and increasing equity. I'll just say that we do have a slight panel change. Unfortunately, Robin McKinney is sick and can't be here this morning. But we do also have Aisha Nyandoro on virtually. Yes, she's there. I can't see that, but okay. So I'm just going to start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tiffaney Bradley, the Public Engagement Director for Mayors for Guaranteed Income, or MGI as we like to call it. MGI is a coalition of about 100 mayors across the country who are advocating for a federally guaranteed income. We recently launched Counties for Guaranteed Income, adding about 20 county electeds to our movement. We have about 45 pilots in 31 states, representing about 29 million people. We believe that everyone deserves an income floor and should be able to afford basic necessities such as food, rent, and transportation. With that being said, I'm excited to be here to share more about MGI and the work that we're doing to reduce poverty in America.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peggy Bailey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Vice President for Housing and Income Security at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We recently combined our housing team with what was previously our family income support team to recognize the fact that what we're solving for, basically, when we're working on social support programs, is income, a lack of income. You know, in the homelessness space, oftentimes people are blamed for experiencing homelessness due to mental health or behavioral health conditions or not having a job or any of these things that we continually blame people for. But really, that is a false narrative. The narrative should be that people don't make enough money either through work or benefits to be able to afford the basic things that they need. And housing is one of the most expensive things that families have to pay for. So how can we think about these two things together is the premise for why we brought these two teams together. I am back at the Center on Budget. I came back last summer after serving as Secretary Fudge's Senior Advisor on Rental Assistance, which was an honor of a lifetime and really a historic time for HUD and to be part of the administration. And I'm just really happy to be here today.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the virtual option. I am Aisha Nyandoro. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Springboard Opportunities. I am also the architect of the Magnolia Mothers Trust, which is currently the longest running guaranteed income project in the country, specifically focused on providing economic security for Black women living in federally subsidized affordable housing. And I'm also the co-chair and co-founder of the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, which is a task force of over 140 practitioners, policymakers, and researchers focused and committed to getting us a federal guaranteed income.
Fantastic, wonderful. So the format today is really going to be a discussion. I will pose some questions to our experts. Please, as we're discussing, if you have questions or ideas, just jot them down. We will have a Q&A for the last about 15 minutes of our session. So great, so let's just get into it. So what is guaranteed income and how are these programs implemented?
Well, a guaranteed income provides monthly cash payments with no strings attached, given to those who are disproportionately impacted by economic injustices. The GI pilots can supplement rather than replace our existing social safety networks and programs, and can be a tool for improving racial and gender equity. For MGI, how we implement our programs, they are mayor-led or mayor-endorsed, because every city is different and the mayors know their constituents. They know the need of those who live in their communities. And we rely on them to select targeted groups for our pilot programs. We also rely on them to select partner organizations who would implement and oversee the pilot programs. Baltimore, Robin isn't here, but we actually work with them on a pilot program there, and they are on the ground dealing with the recipients every day and ensuring that those cash payments are received. Usually it only takes a few months once we establish the funding for our guaranteed income pilots. Again, we implemented about 45 across 31 states, so we have a program in place, an implementation process, but having great partnerships is really important to implement these programs.
And Peggy or Aisha, do you have things to add?
The only thing that I would lean into is the degree to which the guaranteed basic income programs supplement, existing safety net programs, right? Most of them aren't, what families are receiving isn't high enough to replace any of the social safety net programs. So what is really exciting about the pilots is how they're working on how to make sure it's complementary. That families, if the benefit is high enough that it might have implications for safety net programs, families are educated on those choices that they're making. It's brought up front. It's not something that is a surprise to families. And there are efforts in place to try to make these funds exempt from income determinations for any of the social safety net programs that are really interesting and I think important, given the fact that the resources aren't high enough to be able to replace any of those many of those safety net programs.
Thank you. And I actually have a little to add that really dovetails nicely on what Peggy and Tiffany have said. So the beauty of these guaranteed income programs that are being implemented is that they can be designed to address the unique needs within the community, addressing the unique needs of a specific population within the community. And that is what makes guaranteed income so magnificent to me, frankly, is because it does allow you to be very strategic in designing specifically as it relates to your community. And so in that regard, it's not a cookie cutter approach. There's no one guaranteed income program that is alike. For example, our program provides $1,000 a month because that's what our families need. But some programs provide $500 a month, $250 a month. You really can design it based on what the needs are. And I love what Peggy said about it being an income supplement. I think that's a big misconception for individuals that are not familiar with guaranteed income. The individuals who are receiving these guaranteed incomes understand that it's not enough to replace their current supports. They really are using it as a step up to allow them the ability to address their dreams and address their needs. So they're not using it and going about doing the nefarious acts that we, like to hold, that believe that they're doing, of quitting their jobs and, and all of those pieces. So guaranteed income really is a support that we have seen, quite frankly, over the last 4 years, really is allowing families the freedom and agency necessary to go about addressing not only the immediate needs within their lives, but also some of the long-term dreams that they've had to put on hold because of income instability.
Great. So you've said that that guaranteed income, it is meant to supplement and complement safety social net programs. So maybe we'll start with you, Aisha, on this. How is it different than universal basic income?
So, it's very different than universal basic income. And thank you. A lot of times individuals use those two terms interchangeably, and they're not the same. So universal basic income is universality. That's everyone gets a check. Guaranteed income is very specific to addressing the specific needs of a population that are the most financially harmed by the policies that we have in place. I am an advocate for guaranteed income. I am not an advocate for universal basic income. I don't need a check. I'm very clear. And so we have to be honest about what that means. And we also have to be honest about, if we go about providing a universal basic income, what that would do for our social safety net. And we would have to do the hard work of making sure that that universal basic income that is provided is significant enough to allow those families that actually do need those resources to continue to be supported and not doing harm.
Great. Tiffany or Peggy, would you like to comment on this or?
Just to add, I really try to simplify the difference between guaranteed income and universal basic income. Um, with guaranteed income, the money is given to targeted groups who need the money. Universal, everyone receives the same monthly recurring payments regardless of their income levels. So that means if you are a millionaire, you still receive the same payments as everyone else.
Okay. And we did get this question. I think it should be obvious, but let's go over it anyway. The difference between guaranteed income and minimum wage.
So, well, I can take that question. Minimum wage is more associated with work, obviously. So it would be it's about creating a minimum wage, and a lot of people have started to use the term working, living wage, so that people can get paid enough to be able to afford their basic needs and not need guaranteed basic income. They would have the resources to meet their basic needs, or at least may not need as much basic income or guaranteed income. And guaranteed income is separate from work. As Tiffany, Aisha have said, it is targeted to a specific population, and the point is to allow people, the agency, to be able to use money to pay for the things that they determine that they need, not the things that are predetermined by the government.
Wonderful. And just to round this out, because we really want to drill down and make sure everybody kind of understands the concepts. I know that there's a lot of misconceptions, right, out there about what guaranteed income is, and we've gone through a few. But are there any other common misperceptions that you see when talking about guaranteed income programs?
I
And-
would like this. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I actually like to start with this because I get this question so much. And I think if we focus on the misconceptions, we're actually reinforcing those misconceptions when we give them agency and when we give them voice. So I like to actually talk about what it is that we're learning from guaranteed income. And that's the joy and agency and dignity that families are allowed to have extends itself beyond that time stamp. So for example, with our work with the Magnolia Mothers Trust, we started in 2018. This year we went back and we had conversations and evaluations with those moms for the first time that were in our very first cohort of 20 moms. And here we are almost 5 years later. We've gone through a pandemic, we've gone through a race crisis, we're still going through inflation. Those moms still have the joy and freedom to this day that they experienced in 2018 when they first received that check. Those are the conversations that we need to be having rather than reinforcing the misconceptions that we all know are not true and that we all are well aware of where those misconceptions are coming from. The way that we get to permanency with guaranteed income is if we begin to shift the narrative on how we talk about this work. The way that we shift the narrative is that those of us that are doing this work, leading these efforts, we have to be the ones that say enough is enough. We're going to start talking about the pieces that we know are true rather than continuing to reinforce and give voice to those pieces that we know are rooted in racism, sexism, and patriarchy.
Yeah, thank you. I like that shifting of the narrative. I don't know, Tiffany or Peggy, do you have anything?
Well, I can't express how important what Aisha just said is, the shifting of the narrative. Too often in our world, right, we focus on the negative. And what that does is just reinforces the things that our opponents might say about us. And there's a whole effort at play now, right, about narrative change, understanding the difference between narrative and messaging, and leading with the things that we want to say. And I think, and then also, raising up the paternalism that exists within the existing social safety net programs, right? That's what guaranteed basic income helps us overcome. The way that I like to talk about it, at HUD, right after I left in August, Secretary Fudge issued the Economic Justice Initiative, which was focused on renters and helping renters start to save those first dollars that can lead to wealth, right? A lot of times we talk about closing the racial wealth gap. Well, talking about wealth sounds like you're talking about a lot of money, right? In order to start that, you have to start with being able to save that 5, 10, $15 a month that are the first steps to being able to build up a savings that then hopefully leads to the things that will build up wealth. And that's what guaranteed income is to me, right? It's giving people cash, be able to make the decisions that they need, and to be able to not what we often do in the social safety net programs is penalize them for gaining, right? And so then families can never get ahead. And so another of the benefits that I would add is that allowing families to start to build success and not be always fighting upstream, but be able to swim with the stream.
Great, that's wonderful. So let's turn into some of the ways in which guaranteed income is really impactful. And so how is it impactful? Why is it important? You've made some of the distinctions about breaking paternalism, but can we add to that? Aisha or?
Okay, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
couldn't tell if
No, I
somebody-
know you can't.
Yeah, I could not tell if I lost audio or what was happening. Apologies.
So I was just saying, how is guaranteed income impactful? Why is it so important?
Yeah, I can't over emphasize this enough. I think guaranteed income is so impactful because it is the cash without restrictions. And I cannot overemphasize that enough because in this country, for families that are financially marginalized, that simplicity is often not a reality. So it's impactful because it allows these families the cash without restrictions, giving them that agency to do whatever it is that they need for themselves and their families. It shifts the narrative on saying we know better than you, and we know what's best for you, and it centers them squarely in their own lives, giving them the ability to take care of whatever it is they need. And how often have we seen that be the reality for families that are, using various vouchers or subsidies? It's just not the norm. And so guaranteed income allows that to be the norm. And allowing that to be the norm, it is so freeing. And again, it's freeing not only in that moment. I tell people all the time, the least sexy thing of what it is that we do with guaranteed income is providing the cash every month. It's the long-term impacts, and those long-term impacts are still being written, but it's the changing of a family's destiny over time. And that's what gets me excited, and that's the impact of this work. And those are the pieces we don't talk about enough because we're so caught up in having to fight and talk about the moment. But we're already seeing, for those of us that have been doing the work for the last 4 or 5 years, we're already seeing some of the short-term impacts and long arc of this work. And I just continue to be excited about what's coming next.
And just to give sort of a real world example, and not to want to put any of the lawyers in the room out of any work, but one of the things that guaranteed income can do, right, is a housing example. Right now, when families get housing assistance, they have to ask for the landlord's permission to be able to access a unit. Even though many places have source of income anti-discrimination measures in space, you still have to ask the landlord. The landlord has to open up the unit to be able to be inspected, meet HUD rules, and it puts a lot of power in the hands of the landlord. And it's why we need a source of income anti-discrimination measures in the first place. Well, if a family has cash and can go and rent that unit just like anyone else, that takes a level. It's not to say that landlords won't find other ways to be racist and discriminatory, but at least it takes a major one out of play for families and allows families to be able to enter into the rental market just like any other family does, without the unfortunate stigma that follows them if they have housing assistance.
And I'll just add, our pilot programs have research firms attached to them, gathering and analyzing data. And we've probably looked at about 30 pilots, and the data continuously show that the pilot recipients are spending their cash on groceries, utilities, and basic necessities, healthcare, emergencies. They're able to save and reduce their debt. And what we're seeing is it demonstrates how a guaranteed income can provide an income floor for those who need it the most and continue to address the racial and gender wealth gap of Black and Brown people.
That's fantastic. I would really like to, again, hone in on some of those outcomes. And so you talked about some of the research, and I'm just wondering, right, what evidence there is that these programs actually reduce the racial wealth gap or increase equity.
Sorry. So I think if we are asking guaranteed income to reduce the racial wealth gap, that's a big lift. So what guaranteed income does is it provides income stability in that moment. Wealth is something very different. And so what we are seeing is that, of course, guaranteed income allows you the ability, as Tiffaney was saying, to go about paying, getting out of debt, getting a better job, going on vacation, all of those pieces that you might not have been able to do if you had not had that income stability. So we know over time with those pieces that we are seeing families that are able to get to wealth. But again, yeah, and I just realized I have a lot of these. I feel like it's the wrong question. Again, I feel like that's the wrong question because I think the definition of wealth in this country is entirely too limited. I understand that wealth is what you own versus what you owe. For a and it's limited in how we talk about it. For a population that is just getting to stability, this ideal of wealth creation, how it's so very limited currently, it's a tall lift. And when we talk to our families about wealth, it's never, oh, their stock or their income portfolio. It's always, I just want to have stability to be able to take my kids on vacation annually, have that house with the garage. All of those pieces are how they define wealth. And so it's really for us, when we look at it, it's really more about holistic prosperity and how families are defining what a good life looks like for them. And is a guaranteed income allowing them to get to that holistic prosperity? Yes. Do we have a lot more work to do in the movement as it relates to getting to closing the wealth gap? Oh God, yes. But it is going to take so much more than a guaranteed income. It is going to take an overhaul of the systems that are currently in place and the policies that are currently in place that are intentionally designed to continue, that are intentionally designed for us to continue to have a us versus them mentality.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, we don't want to lay too much on any of the pilots of what they need to prove in order to show that they're needed, right? And so I think it's important to think about this, especially more holistically, to understand that the movement of guaranteed basic income is built on research that already exists, right? We know that cash helps families. We know that from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, right? And that's a lot of the work, the historic work that we've done at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, of leaning in and trying to help states lean into any of the flexibilities that they have, use as much of their and use more and more of their funds for cash actually in families' hands. And we know that housing assistance helps families. Well, if we gave them cash to pay for their housing, then it's logical that that would help them, right? It's important to make sure we don't have guaranteed basic income isolated from what we already know works for families. That's why we're at this place of realizing, wait a second, we're spending all this money on administration. We're spending all this money to tell families what to do because we're worried that they're not going to do what we want them to do with their resources. Let's take a step back, figure out how to eliminate those layers and reinvest the resources in what actually works, which is cash for families. I think another place that we know, and another piece of most of the pilots, is helping families have access to financial planning and financial coaching, the same kind of planning that any of us might access. And within HUD, there are a set of programs that are unfortunately called self-sufficiency programs, the biggest one being the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. But HUD has done significant evaluations of that program. part of the program is that families have to engage in skills building and employment and all of that. And it's a perfect example of showing how these paternalistic layers that we layer on these programs don't work, right? Because we forget it's not a fault of the families that they're not making more money. We live in a capitalist country where others get to decide how much I'm going to make. It's not a meritocracy. That's what we learned from the family self-sufficiency demonstrations that have been what we and then what we learned from them is it's the family's ability to keep some of the cash and access to financial planning and coaching. That is what makes the difference for families. And so, when we think about the research around guaranteed basic income, I think it's important to put it in the context of everything we know about what cash assistance can do for families.
Wonderful. And Tiffany, this is for you. Can you provide some examples of programs that are really targeted to certain populations that are really trying to increase economic justice?
So many of our pilots include women of color who are single parents. An example of that is in Birmingham, Alabama, where 110 women with children are receiving $375 a month for a year. Similar programs are in Tacoma, Washington, and Shreveport, Louisiana. In Durham, North Carolina, 109 returning citizens or those who have been released from prison are receiving $600 a month for a year. Richmond, Virginia is considering a similar program. Again, the mayors in our programs choose the targeted groups. And the reason why they're choosing these groups is because they know the communities, they know the individuals who need the cash payments the most. And so we see a lot of women in our programs and a high percentage of African Americans. I think it's about 41% of our pilot programs are Black women. And so there's definitely a disparity there because what we see is a lot of Black women are more likely to have low income wages. So as they were just talking about earlier, we believe that guaranteed income can help supplement those social safety net programs.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Tiffany. And I think we should really be lifting up the policy needs and the shifts in systems that need to occur. Black women in this country are some of the most financially marginalized. Black women make 62% of what white men make. And the narrative is that Black women are not working, when the reality is that they are the most tapped into the outside the home capitalistic market of employment while also working within the home. So as we are seeing these guaranteed income programs, even the guaranteed income program that I run, the Magnolia Mothers Trust, targeting Black women, the conversation really needs to be why. Why are we having to have these programs in place that are making sure that this specific population is getting to income for? What do we need to be doing to shift our policies and shift our systems so that this no longer continues to be our narrative, and that this population that is raising kids, working, and doing all the things that we say are the right thing to do are paid and provided the wages that they need to actually have a living wage.
And Aisha, I'll jump in there. So I'm curious on your perspective, is it, it's kind of living wage versus guaranteed income programs, but is there, even if we had a living wage, are there still, or if we had the policies and supports, would we no longer need the guaranteed income programs, or are there any other benefits that you see?
I think we need federal legislation as it relates to more cash-based systems. So whether or not that is a federal guaranteed income, whether that is not reforming our TANF system, so where we actually are, families are actually allowed to receive the TANF benefits, whether or not that is a federal child tax credit mandate. We understand that we need more cash-based policies, period. How we get there, I'll let the policymakers and politicians figure that out. But the word on the streets, given the work that I am doing and given what it's all that we have seen over the last 5 years, is that families need cash in their pockets. They don't need subsidies. They don't need vouchers. They don't need hoops. They don't need patriarchy making them feel as if they are failures for needing these resources. They need cash in pockets. And we have so many blueprints within this country about how to make that happen. What it is that we are missing is we're missing the political will in order to get us to permanency. And we like to tell ourselves, oh, it's not possible. It actually is possible. We saw with the child tax credit. We saw what the child tax credit was able to accomplish in 6 months. We moved the needle on child poverty in 6 months. We had not moved the needle in over 4 decades. And in 6 months, we saw a 46% reduction in child poverty. That's amazing. So we have the blueprint. We know what it is that we need to do. We now have to get to the political will to get us to permanency.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if folks have followed the conversations around poverty lately, and especially over the last 2 weeks when because last week Matthew Desmond released his new book, Poverty by America, and that's in a line of books that have either recently come out or are expected to come out over the next year, really reframing how we think about persistent poverty in this country. So often, and one of the themes of what we've been talking about, right, is layering on blame of people who are living in poverty and saying that there's some sort of deficiency within them as to why they're not able to meet their basic needs. And so we focus on that. And so has a lot of research, right? Looking at why are people in poverty, but looking at them and them instead of looking at us and the systems in play that keep people in poverty or that also benefit off of people who are living in poverty. And that's a main theme of Matthew's book and some of the other books that are coming out. And I think that's something we can't just keep in academia or amongst all of us. We've got to talk about that. Talk about the intentionality that exists in this country around poverty and keeping people in poverty. Because as Aisha says, we know what works, and we actually can do it in a crisis. And oftentimes it's a crisis when it impacts white people, and then things revert back to the norm where white people are doing better and Black people are still doing worse. One of my favorite charts, because if you know the Center on Budget, we love charts. And one of my favorite charts that we have is the unemployment chart. Like right now, we're saying that unemployment is at historic lows, around 3%, in between 3 and 4%. But if you look at that broken down by race, right? Well, unemployment for Black people is double and almost a little bit more than double that. And so we're saying that we're at full employment. Like, that doesn't make sense. And that our economic policy should act as if we're at almost full employment. Like, that doesn't make sense. We have to start to examine, start to tease it, and if we have to examine the ways that we're how we do the same old all the time, and then wonder why disparities exist. And really flip things on its head to make sure that we're not consistently leaving people behind.
I have some questions for the audience, which I think tie into this. So from J Spear, we have, what are some strategies for getting past the policyholders' desire to tell people how to live their lives and, put those roadblocks in front of people in the social safety net program?
I will just say for us, we have been advocating on a state level to get child tax credits passed in several states that our mayors are working. A federal guaranteed income may not happen anytime soon, but we're still advocating for that. But it does start, I believe, on a local and state level.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is a question that I've been wrestling with for over the last year, ever since we did not get to permanency the first time with the child tax credit. And I think this is what I believe. This is my belief. I think that we are not having enough conversations, or we truly have not connected the dots between the connections between policy and narrative and individual values. I think when we're talking about guaranteed income and cash without restrictions, it is so tied to individuals' personal feelings and their personal value sets that we have got to understand the long arc in shifting those values in order to get to the change that is necessary. And that's really hard to think about, because that means that we really have to be patient. And we really have to continue to do the grinding work year to year, approving this case in point of something that we all know to be true. But what my dear friend Ann Price always says is that policy moves at the shift in narrative. And I believe that to be true. And I believe that narrative moves and shifts at the speed of values. And so how do we go about changing individuals' mindsets? And I think that truly is with narrative. I think we have to do more strategic narrative and allowing those individuals who are being impacted by these policies share their narratives. I often say that we have to change the narrative by changing the narrator. So we have to make for more opportunities for that. And it just can't be during an election cycle. It just can't be when we are at a high stakes policy shift. For example, when we were trying to get the CTC to permanency, you could not turn on a TV or read the paper or listen to a podcast without there being a family talking about what the CTC meant for them in that moment. Well, here we are now not receiving the CTC. We need that same level of urgency where families are talking about what not having these resources mean. But it's sort of silent. And so since we're allowing it to be silent, we're allowing that sense of agency to no longer exist, and we're allowing our policymakers to forget. And so we have to continue to do the hard work of keeping the steady drumbeat. I believe that's how we get to the policy wins. And it's hard because there is so much that is competing for our attention, but we have to keep that same level of dedication, not just when we know that we are in a high stakes fight.
Right. The way that I talk about this is really having the courage to talk about justice, right? And talk about it every day, all day to everybody, and not letting the pessimism of the moment take away our push for true justice for people, because you can't. That is the direction that we have to go in. Is just carving through the BS and talking about what is really needed for families. And a justice orientation is what will help us do that.
Fantastic. I saw Peter Edelman raise his hand, so I'm going to give him the floor to be able to ask a question.
Thank you. I was saying, Alicia, that this is a wonderful conversation. I just want to, and it's been fun for me because I do all this stuff, and to see it come up from all of you. But I would say a little bit more about CTC, the child tax credit, which you did talk about. But in terms of where we are now, we could talk about UBI, but that's way down the road, and so we don't have to, perhaps right now, but CTC is really with us. In fact, the point I want to make sure that people who don't know, it existed for a year with our president and the Congress. And for that year, and you did talk about it and just mentioning about how enormously the amount of people low income went way down, along with a lot of other things that year. But still, that was powerful. And we were then, things are a little different right now, but the Senate, we were up to, except for 2 senators. So we were there, and we had it for 1 year for those 2 people. So I just want to understand, if we're talking about what we're doing and everything that you're talking about, justice and so on, the next thing is to get CTC to be for everybody. And you said, I mean, this works. And you don't have to go to some place and talk to somebody and be nice and they throw you out we could talk about TANF, which ought to go down the road immediately, but only getting better with this program. So I just want to really mention that over even over the next 2 years, where it's not going to happen, but keep on, as you're saying, because and there's a lot of other things to do, and Matt's book is fantastic because he's reminding us, if we needed it, that housing is an incredibly, I mean, you work for it, and so you get more money to people, and which we need, and we still have a mess on the house size. There's lots more other things to do. But I really, for people to understand, and if we're talking about lawyers around the country and what they might do to push for this, just on the basis of what was already said here, to make the work that the mayors are doing, which are so important. But as you said, they're relatively small. The amount of the money, but the fact that they're 45, I think you said, are doing it's fantastic. My friend Mayor Tubbs is my pal, and that's where it goes. So I really one of our things, but one of the top things that we should do is to do everything that we can, and everything that you said about how to talk about it and so on. We should be doing that work right now, and it's the next, I hope, a short period of time to get it permanent.
Thank you. Any reactions to that?
I'll say during the pandemic, we did do a poll to determine the support for guaranteed income, and it was at 55%, but that was almost 3 years ago. So we're in the process of conducting a new poll to see who do we need to reach out to, what's the messaging, because again, there is some issues with misconceptions and how people see these programs. So hopefully in the next few months, we'll have a better gauge of how we can expand the conversation surrounding guaranteed income.
No, I would just say that, that the other piece in what we talk about is how to make the programs that exist now. Because if we think about what we're learning from guaranteed income, we've got to figure out how to scale it, right? And that is going to have, and one of the best things to think about, right, for a long range plan is, what is TANF supposed to be? And what do we want, and how do we make it that? And is thinking about like the next generation of TANF reform, the thing to think about when it comes to guaranteed basic income is, another Philadelphia, I think, is about to do a cash pilot that's specific to rental assistance, of how to make rental assistance look more like food assistance, where, and as I talked about before, putting the power in the hands of the family rather than in the hands of the landlord or the property owner, right? What are the ways that we can, as we have this march toward justice and economic justice for all, what are the incremental things we can do that reorient our system so that they're not disrupting that march to justice? And those are two things that I think are in the shorter term things that, well, TANF reform isn't exactly in the shorter term, but are thinking about how do we take what we're learning and build the future that we want it to be on the chassis of what we have today.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about, so we said CTC, we had 3-year evidence-based work. Guaranteed income plans, you can see similarities in that, funding through the American Rescue Plan is over. And so how are we funding programs for the future without the American Rescue Plan?
So we had several MGI pilot cities such as St. Paul, Minnesota, and Richmond, Virginia, who use the CARES Act dollars to fund longer-term guaranteed income programs in their cities. But there are additional funding options. We talked about TANF. That's one option that we could use. Community service block grants, housing and urban development grants. All these federal dollars, there's flexibility in how you can allocate those dollars, especially on the state level, right? And so city and state budgets can also be leveraged to fund guaranteed income programs. We see in California, the governor there has allocated millions of dollars to a guaranteed income program statewide, specifically for low-income individuals. That money was allocated from the state general fund. So there are options. People just have to be creative and be proactive to find those other funding sources.
Well, we haven't talked enough yet either about the role that philanthropy has played in getting us off the ground when it comes to the guaranteed basic income programs. And obviously, philanthropy isn't the long-term strategy, but but they are the foundational strategy we've seen from being able to get pilots off the ground. And so, you know, if this is something that you want to push in your community and work with with local officials, getting the philanthropic partners together is a great first step, and that can help bring the state and local resources that we need while we look for federal funding and more federal support for the long term and to scale.
Great. So I want to, I think, open it up to questions. We have some other questions that kind of get into the weeds that we get into if we don't have questions from the audience, but if there are questions, oh, we do have a lot.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Kate Maselli. I work at Futures Without Violence. I'm curious for the folks who have programs providing guaranteed income. Are you doing any studies on the efficacy of those programs for folks in abusive relationships? Have you done any studies to document whether that money has helped them either leave an abusive relationship or prevent them from returning to an abusive relationship? And if not, can I advocate that you do that and talk to us later?
That was my response. We are not looking at that data, but that's something that we should consider, especially for the women.
The one that I think is Denver, Denver, because they're targeting people experiencing homelessness. And I know and I only know this because I just met with them last week. That they're at least people who are fleeing domestic violence situations are a huge piece of people experiencing homelessness, and they talked about that population in particular. So looking at the Denver model might have some. They just started, so they don't have any findings or anything like that. But connecting with the folks that are working on that to see what they're learning is one example of it.
Aisha, did you want to add to that?
Thank you again for this amazing panel and for presenting your ideas. I'm Chris White with the Georgetown Law's new Coalition for Racial Equity and Democratic Economy. One of the programs that we're supporting in the city involved a $350,000 program that got funding to entrepreneurs in DC's Ward 8. These are largely low-income African-American. Half the cohort were women, half the cohort were men. I'm wondering about the intersection of GBI with funding from community development financial institutions as a way of leveraging it, and what experiences you've seen with the cohorts where entrepreneurship was something that was bolstered, in the populations receiving GBI, so that they can, use business formation and growth to help augment their income.
We do partner with a few universities, but we still pay them. So, but that's something that we probably should consider, is finding other sources where we can offset the cost. But there are a few schools that give us a discount because they are doing their own research in addition to the guaranteed income pilots, because they want to see how these programs are reducing poverty and addressing the wealth and racial gap for Black and Brown individuals.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of intersection between individuals using a guaranteed income and going into entrepreneurship or business development. That's one of the beautiful pieces of guaranteed income, allowing you the agency to do whatever is necessary. So we have seen that intersection. And then also, I just wanted to go back and clarify, I think something that maybe it was Peter in the audience, that there are not just 45 guaranteed income programs right now. There are over 100 guaranteed income pilots being implemented in this country. And the majority of those were funded and are being funded with philanthropic dollars. So guaranteed income and guaranteed income pilots just did not come online because of funding from the CARES Act. There was philanthropy filling in the gap prior to, and there probably will be philanthropy filling in the gap after the CARES funding begins to cease this year in a lot of these communities. So.
The thing that I would point out is what these pilots have done to help families get banked in the first place, and building credit histories and improving their credit histories, and that piece of the financial improvement for families. And so that is one thing that we're also seeing from these pilots. I mean, obviously, we're also studying like what happens with that. Like, are there, and going to the banks to talk about the fees and other things that they charge that can set families back as well. But it's giving us an entry point into that conversation in a way that we haven't.
Here's the question.
We've got a question.
Hello, this is Lydia Brown. For those who don't know me, I'm part of ABA's CRSJ Disability Rights Committee. I'm also the Director of Public Policy at the National Disability Institute, where we focus on economic opportunity and financial inclusion for people with disabilities. And outside of that work, I'm the founder of the Autistic People of Color Fund, which is an entirely autistic BIPOC-led organization that gives direct money to individual autistic people of color. And in any case, I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about a move toward guaranteed income programs, and I'm hearing that one challenge that I think all of you have echoed in different ways is that right now most pilots are funded through philanthropic efforts rather than being institutionalized within our state system. But I'm a proponent of guaranteeing everyone to have basic income and also of guaranteeing people have access to housing and healthcare, et cetera. But in our current political environment, I often encounter, besides the obviously racist and often ableist and classist arguments against guaranteed income, the specific argument that giving people guaranteed income will further drive inflation and will not be able to match increasing costs of living, that if you are giving people more money, then that will in turn drive costs for products and services higher, whether that is everything from wages that need to be paid to direct service workers supporting people with disabilities, many of whom are also disabled and also often women of color themselves, or anything from wanting to do things like see a movie or go out to eat somewhere and get Chinese food, shitty or otherwise, for some night. And so my question is, as someone who I feel like I'm relatively new to the space of policy on guaranteed income, and you all are in the weeds of it, how do you respond to those critiques about the fear that giving more people more guaranteed income will drive inflation and therefore defeat the purpose of trying to give people additional economic security? I would be very interested in hearing that so that I can build and sharpen my own analysis. I also ran for office last year, so like extra interested in understanding this. Thank you.
Great. Well, I could start being from the Center on Budget. So first, and I won't take up the whole time. So mostly is I would encourage you to visit our website at cbpp.org because we have lots of talking points along these lines. The second thing I would say that maybe my tax and budget friends might not say is, one, people are looking for excuses not to give people what they need. So that's the first thing to remember, is that so we're just gonna not let people eat and live, right? We hear the same thing when it comes to rental assistance in particular, right? Oh, well, if we give everybody rental assistance, it's gonna drive up costs. Well, what's happening now? Like, I don't understand what we're doing. But the main thing is that what we know is that when we give people with low incomes cash, they spend that. And so the other side of the equation is the economic driver that we're holding back when we don't give families more cash to invest in the system. And that's really the main crux of what I would of what to say is that families with little to no money, when we give them money, they spend it. So it's a lost opportunity of being able to drive to a stronger economy if we don't give people money that they need. And then the other piece is the drain on the system, right? We're spending money in other ways rather than investing in families so that they could help with the overall economy instead. So there are inefficiencies in our current structure that we can get rid of if families just had more money. The last thing I would say, and Matthew Desmond makes this great point in the book very, very strongly, of how we're supplementing corporate interests in with the existing structures that we have as well. I saw a strong one of my favorite housing advocates yesterday, Margot Cashel, who you should follow on Twitter if you don't, say, right, like I am a homeowner. I am greatly subsidized by the federal government to own my home. And like Aisha said, I don't need guaranteed, it is great, right? But I don't need that supplement. We are investing more in me than the person that I walked by on the street today on the way to, who's living on the sidewalk, who I might have passed on the street today walking from Union Station, right? So those are, I think, the three biggest pieces, we're losing out on an economic driver, where we have these inefficiencies in the system that we need to overcome.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm Jason Howson-Loy. I've actually joining here from Singapore. I have two questions. Firstly, I wanted to go a little bit back to the philanthropic funding that is funding a lot of these UBI experiments. I'd be curious if we were to take, as far as I know, a lot of this funding is coming from, for example, or a significant proportion of this funding is coming from, say, OpenAI, who's looking at this in a broader context, looking at universal basic income experiments. I would be curious to know, to what extent have you thought about the sources of this funding, how far ahead you're looking in terms of the big picture? And the second thing I would ask is, with the question of universal basic income, I'm not so interested, or like, yes, we've had a lot of discussion on, does this incentivize people to continue to look for jobs? But the question that I would be interested, especially given that I'm on the younger side of potentially people who are here at this conference, and I would be curious to hear your takes on what it means to look for fulfillment and what it means and how that potentially could be separated from this idea of income and what careers look like outside of earning the bare minimum needed to survive.
I'll just say that for us at MGI, our long-term big picture is to fund these programs on a federal level where we're not relying on donations from people to fund these programs. That's our long-term goal. I don't know.
It's the long-term goal of guaranteed income community of practice as well. The goal, I think, for a lot of us is to really move towards federal policy and what would that look like to be funded so that we wouldn't be relying on philanthropic dollars, because whenever you are relying on philanthropy to fund basic infrastructure, you've already lost. So that is what, the majority of us that are advocates are advocating towards. And as far as the question as it relates to fulfillment, so much of what it is that we are interested in and what we really talk about as it relates to guaranteed income is the freedom and joy and agency that these resources are providing. The ideal of work in this country and the definition of work is limited. We don't talk about our care infrastructure. We don't talk about the work that's being done inside the home. So guaranteed income does allow families that freedom to define work however it works for them and to go about actually getting a higher paying jobs if that is a part of what it is that they define as work, working outside of the home.
I just want to jump in here because we have a question along a similar line and around this aspect of, redefining work or fulfillment. There is a question here about just, is there any attempt to measure some of these? So this question was, there's an improvement in mental health, right? For people who have stability and don't always have to worry about paying for food and housing. Are there attempts to measure some of these other aspects of what guaranteed income is providing, the fulfillment, the mental health aspect?
With our work, we measure we do. So with our work, we specifically measure agency. We do not so I was very clear the last 2 years in our work with the Magnolia Mothers Trust that we were going to begin to move the narrative and shift the conversations towards what it was that we felt were missing within the conversation around guaranteed income or cash without restrictions. And so we were no longer going to measure what people were doing with their money, employment, savings, all of that there's more than enough data for. And we have proved time and time again that those aren't the questions that actually have to be answered, that we weren't going to continue to reinforce those narratives. So we began to shift our evaluation and really focus on joy and agency and how families were able to show up in their lives. And so, yeah, our data shows that 95% of our moms feel as if they actually have agency. And not only do they feel like they have agency with their own lives, they feel they have positivity towards the lives and that future outcome for their kids. This year, for the first time, we actually talked to kids within the Magnolia Mothers Trust. And those kids talk about the freedom and joy that they have, knowing that their mom was not stressed. So there is a way to do these evaluations differently. It really is us pushing back on, quite frankly, a lot of the white supremacist frames, how we have gone about measuring a lot of these programs to begin with. If we want different outcomes, we have to go about doing the hard work or measuring for different outcomes.
Fantastic, wonderful. There was another question back here, but yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Charlotte Stewart. I work at the Pew Charitable Trust just down the street on a project that is looking at the impact of the high rate of consumer debt litigation in state courts. And one of the things we have found is that a lot of folks are being sued for private consumer debts from like $600 to up to a couple $1,000s. It's a high volume of cases that are hitting our state court dockets for relatively small amounts of money, except if you are on the margins. If folks are floating multiple credit cards, one little snag and there's a domino effect, and then they're getting sued. And I'm curious about whether the guaranteed income dollars, if this is probably inconsistent from place to place, but whether they are exempted from garnishment and or whether they have been a tool for some consumers to resolve debts before they hit the courts. And one reason I ask is that the court process itself, we're finding, ends up sometimes doubling or tripling the amount of debt because of the cost of going to court, the attorney's time, and all that sort of thing. So I'm kind of curious about the intersection of that, which might be appropriate for the next panel. I don't know, but just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
I think I can talk about the second question, because obviously from a housing perspective, we see the same thing, right? I think when Matthew Desmond wrote Evicted, he said that the average eviction is for, less than $600. And so, that I would add that to the list. And I think, and that's really what the impetus for, I think, these pilots has been, to understand the small margin that we're talking about of how families are living. And one of the things that we learned from the pandemic, right, that it doesn't, and on all the statistics, right, most families can't survive a $400 crisis. We know that, the statistics that you mentioned. And so that is part of what we're trying to learn from the guaranteed basic income pilots. If family can simply $500 a month make all the difference in a family being able to have a stronger foundation because of the understanding that it doesn't take much for that foundation to grow.
I'll just say that we do have a lot of data, but where the pilot recipients are spending a lot of their money on basic necessities, they are reducing some of their debt, but it's such a small percentage, and usually we don't know exactly where they're spending those dollars.
see, one more question here. We've got just about 4 minutes left.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Meredith Dotson with the Coalition on Human Needs and really grateful for the wisdom of this panel. To following up on Aisha's point about the goal is policy change, I'm curious if participants in these programs have participated in kind of engaged in advocacy, sharing their expertise to shape the policy proposals or sharing their stories with policymakers, and then what that reception has been like.
Yeah, from us, I can definitely say we have an entire campaign called Front and Center, where we allow our participants to write monthly op-eds that are then published in Ms. Magazine. But not only that, we have an entire campaign around narrative and shifting narratives, where we make sure that our families that we work with are positioned to advocate for themselves, advocate for their communities, and advocate for change. And it's change at the local, state, and federal level. We have had our participants testify not only before our state legislators, but we've also had our participants be in conversation with the White House regarding changes that are needed to the system for it to be a system that is actually working for them. I think that we need more efforts around that. And again, I think that we need to make sure that those efforts are sustained over the long term, not just when there is a call for a vote or a call for action in the immediacy.
I'll just say MGI was founded in Stockton, California. We have a lot of success that we can tout in California. Most of the large cities there have a pilot program. And then we now have a statewide guaranteed income pilot for low-income individuals statewide.
Okay, I think this might be the last question here. Fairly unique question, I think. So is the guaranteed income program a tax shelter? If a person has a 320K tax obligation, is this a program IRS accepts as a qualified tax shelter? Any thoughts on that?
The participants I work with don't even know what a tax shelter is.
Well, then I think that does it for our panel. I'll say thank you to our panelists. Hopefully everyone learned a lot about guaranteed income programs and can start with the positive, shifting the narrative instead of some misconceptions around guaranteed income programs. Thank you.
I too want to thank the panel. You all were tremendous, very educational, very insightful. 2 quick notes. Peggy, I want to blame you. I was at a conference yesterday, Just the Economy conference. I saw the book, Poverty by America. I didn't buy it because I've already got a stack of books on my nightstand I need to read. I just bought it on Amazon because you mentioned it again.
It's great.
So adding that to my need to get to do list. I love the comment about shifting the policy narrative and personal values. That was very insightful and very helpful to us. I'm looking forward to a continued conversation with all of you.